Welcome to Let's Chew the Gum. I'm your host, Protocol. We talk a lot about a lot of things in this show while we chew the gum, and just like every show, we always have
something for your mind, mind, something for your mind, mind, something for your mind,
정신을 집어넣으세요. 어떤 것이 필요합니까?
something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind,
정신을 집어넣으세요.
something for your
Welcome to this edition of Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. I'm your host, Protocol. I'm so glad to have you for this episode. As you guys know, we have been celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month for the last 3 weeks. All of the episodes have been dedicated to that. We've had some phenomenal guests on. If you haven't had a chance to watch those episodes, please go back and do so. In fact, go back and watch all 3.5 seasons so far. There's some great topics, and I'm sure that will be beneficial to you. I want to first thank my audience from around the world. I mentioned last week that we are in over 40 countries, and I'm always appreciative of everyone that tunes in, everyone that sends the emails, and I definitely reply to all of those, as you know. Today's show, I'm so excited for this show as well, because this is the sort of the capstone of our Hispanic Heritage Month series. We have a great topic for you today and some great guests. Let me tell you about this topic. It is one that is very much so relevant, sometimes controversial, always about family and inclusiveness. And so our topic today, and I have to say, this topic was inspired by one of our guests here tonight. Thank you, Gretel, for that, because during one of my last episodes, when I posted online regarding Hispanic Heritage Month, I used the term Hispanic. And a few people, and especially Gretel first, had mentioned, what about other terms that folks identify with? And so today's topic is all about the phrases Hispanic, Latino, Latina, right? Latinx, and Chicano, Chicana, right? We have heard those terms. Many folks don't know where the terms originate from. Some people embrace all of the terms. Some people don't embrace any of the terms. And so I thought it would be a great idea for me to invite guests on that could help me to explore this topic. Although I am not Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx or Chicano, I am a brother to all. And so it was important to me that I brought on guests who are informed that can help us to sort this out. My guests today are Socorro Cisneros. I'll introduce you first. Socorro is a native of Los Angeles. She was raised in the communities of South Central and East Los Angeles. At the age of 12, Socorro was the youngest delegate for the United Neighborhood Organization, also known as UNO. Later in high school and while attending East Los Angeles College, she joined MECHA and participated in boycotts, youth demonstrations, and community empowerment events. She has always been an enormous supporter of organized labor, being born into and growing up in a union household. She worked on the Great Boycott with the United Farm Workers Union early in her life. She earned both business and labor studies degrees in hopes of leveraging her knowledge for the benefit of working families. She is a retired member of Smart Transportation Division. Socorro continues to fight for working families by negotiating labor contracts and staying committed as an activist for the betterment and strength of her high desert community. Socorro is also running for the California State Assembly in the upcoming election. Please welcome Socorro. My next guest is Mr. Luciano Ortiz. Luciano was born and raised in East Los Angeles. His family crossed the border into Texas and made their way to California to settle in Los Angeles. His grandparents and parents were migrant workers. He is a teacher and a father of 2 girls. In fact, he spent 25 years in education and works as a second grade bilingual teacher for the Huanime School District in Ventura County. He is also a community activist working to improve communities through strong neighborhood councils. Welcome, Luciano.
Thank you.
Our final guest, last but not least, Gretel Rodriguez. She was born in El Paso, Texas at the Isleta Indian Reservation, known as Border Babies. She was born 2 days after her mother crossed the Rio Grande with her 4-year-old son and 2-year-old sister. The family was saved by a janitor that kept them safe from Border Patrol in a bathroom stall. She was raised in Los Angeles and fostered by her family when her mother threw her out at the age of 12. She graduated from San Diego State University and is now teaching in San Diego and has been for the last 19 years with a specialization working with border students and families in the English Language Development Department. She has dedicated her life to social justice causes and was the former director of a Chicano youth leadership camp, which was a part of the evolution of the ethnic studies program in her district and county. She earned her master's degree in educational leadership, technology, and is currently teaching online and a proud member of the Association Raza Educators in San Diego. Welcome, Gretel, and all of my distinguished guests. I'm so glad that you all could be here. As I was saying before, our topic are the terms Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Chicano, Latinx, Chicana, all of the above. If you have been anywhere on planet Earth over the last, I don't know how many decades, you've heard these phrases. You may have heard some of the dialogue that goes along with these phrases, terms, some of the disagreements. And I'm going to start out by expressing my knowledge of what these terms are and then allow my guests to chime in on them. So to my understanding, all Hispanics are not Latino and all Latinos are not Hispanics. So the phrase Hispanic comes from or encompasses anyone from a Spanish-speaking country. That would include Spain, right? And that would include many countries here in the Western Hemisphere. And some even go as far to include the Philippines and other islands where the Spaniards were colonizing islands. Mm-hmm. However, Latino would be the nations in the Western Hemisphere, I imagine, south of the United States, but that would also include countries of French and Portuguese speaking nations such as Brazil, Haiti, and perhaps French Martinique and others. Latinx is a term that seeks to be gender neutral and more inclusive of all of those societies, right? Chicano and Chicana is derived from the liberation movement of individuals in the United States during the Civil Rights Movement and is a reclamation of self, a reclamation of pride, a reclamation of existence. So those are just my introductions to those terms and phrases. But again, I brought in individuals that can help me to navigate and to talk about what should be used, what could be used, what perhaps shouldn't be used, and how we might come to a point where it's okay to use whatever. So since Gretel, you inspired me to start this topic, I'm gonna start with you in terms of these phrases and what they mean to you, and what individuals, what should our listeners look for or be aware of when it comes to using them?
I think one of the things that you captured about Chicanismo is the whole idea of colonization, right? When we've been colonized, this is the reason why we're so scattered and we don't know how to identify ourselves, because of the colonization process. Our identities were erased, our languages were erased, our roots were erased. So now we're in a situation where we're battling over identities, and it was caused by colonization. So I have a lot of grace for my brothers and sisters that don't know how to identify. I have a lot, if you choose to be Hispanic and Latino, whatever, I have some grace with that. I don't have grace when you put it on me, like you force me to choose it. So Hispanic Heritage Month, I irk when I think of that, just the fact that this country thinks that I only deserve a month versus all year representation and acknowledgement, the years of sacrifice and contributions that our culture has given is erased by saying you're only allowed a month. And then just hearing Hispanic, which I know the history of that, what it came from just trying to clump us all in together for the government to identify us all together. And again, erasing those roots and identities underneath that. So I don't like that it wasn't from us. We didn't create that term. The government did. And I think that's a lot of resentment that I have towards that term. Again, for me, I need to liberate myself and I need to feel comfortable finding my own identity and our indigenous identity. So I love the fact that Socorro has that behind her, because that itself has been erased and we're in the process of reclaiming that. And sometimes we get backlash from the Native American community, and we can discuss that a little bit later, but we are indigenous to this land. My mother crossing that border was created by a government when that border never existed before. So I just, again, I have a knee-jerk reaction when I hear Hispanic. I've never identified as Hispanic, but I understand some people that do use it. I have to respect when they use it, but if you put it on me, I'm gonna have a battle about it.
Well put, well put. You mentioned the emblem, the calendar behind Socorro, and I would ask Socorro the same thing in terms of your experience, your identity, your outlook on the terms and how they are used to maybe divide and bring together at the same time. What are the intentions behind them, and what is your take on the use of those terms?
Well, I identify myself as Chicana, and that's Chicana with an X, derived from the Nahuatl dialect of the Aztecs. So and that term comes from the 60s, and it really comes from a self-identity and pride. But, you know, along, like it was previously said, I don't appreciate the word Hispanic. I don't identify as a Hispanic because that is not a race, a culture. That is just a word that was used to lump us together. It was actually, it came about during the Nixon administration to lump us together. And it was later first used in the 80s because, you know, they didn't know how to put on the census, you know, Puerto Ricans and Salvadorians and Mexicans. So it just lumped everyone together. But certainly, you know, there's other countries that speak Spanish that would be considered Spanish speaking, right? In Africa, we have, you know, Equatorial Guinea that they speak Spanish. Yeah, are they Latino? Are they Hispanic? But, you know, like it was previously mentioned, I don't identify as a Hispanic. In fact, going through college, it was kind of a derogatory to be referred to as Hispanic. But again, there's that leniency, right? There's that understanding. If you're appreciating something and you're calling a group of people Hispanics, like I understand that because it's not, unfortunately, we don't teach kids this, right? We don't teach them in schools, and you know, my kids may know, but it's not common knowledge. So
Sure. No, great points. Luciano, thank you for being patient and standing by. You know, I would pose the same question or the same invitation for you to speak on, you know, your position and the existence of those terms to, again, identify or to bring together, lump together, or to desegregate people.
Yes, and first I want to say thank you to my sister Gretel and Socorro. They really, you know, nailed some great points, and it leads up to where my experience and my truth is going to come out is regards of education. I grew up with, you know, family members crossing the borders, escaping a lot of different things, but then in Texas and El Paso too, I also have roots in El Paso. And I'm even gonna go further back because Hispanic comes when I grew up and I seen these boxes, right? And here's a kid and you have to identify yourself and the identity is limited as Hispanic. And the conversation came with home because the conversation wasn't gonna take place in the classroom. The conversation of who do you identify and the terms were always at the home because you're gonna get two different explanations, one at home and then one from whoever's teaching in the classroom that has all that power to influence you, which they have. But my experience came as family members who identify themselves as Pachuco. Now, Pachuco is way back, and this is the 40s, 30, 40s. And, there were family members who taught me the history of Pachuco, which led, to the movement of Chicano. And because of the movement there, the youth movement that came across that, the youth movement is important. And the youth came because of the discrimination found in education, discrimination found in different areas. And the Chicano term that my grandparents and great uncles took on, and they use and identify themselves as Chicano, coming from the border, coming from Texas, and then moving into California. They really identify themselves as Chicanos. And I had to learn through history, why did you, call yourself Chicano when they're calling us Hispanics? And what was the difference? And I believe it's how you are taught and who tells you who you are as a young kid, as a young student. I really, really messed with my psyche of who I am. And then what brought root to who I am is the fact, the history and learning from better yourself as your parents. And I believe that, there are many, people who come from different places all around the world who call themselves and want to identify with Latinx, Chicano, Chicana, and some even want to latch on to Hispanic, which they feel comfortable in. And I do not judge them on what their terminology is or how they identify themselves. What I would like to know is, are you educated? Or if you're not, can we talk about it? And can we have a dialogue that encompasses why these movements are so important? Because you got to realize a lot of these movements came from el movimiento, which you had the migrant workers who were very much discriminated on. You had the young kids who couldn't get an education. You had unions who discriminated even there to provide a quality of education and quality of life. So with all those aspects of what my sister said previously, I add on to it that my truth speaks from the experience of what my families and what discrimination they experienced and how they felt the world was treating them. And I was living off of their struggle, which their struggle became my struggle as you get older and you start to realize and you start to really digesting what is really out there. And here we are today still talking about this, which is great. And the fact that we can have dialogues like through your podcast here is wonderful. And so I just love the fact that, thank you for inviting me on and having this great discussion where I describe myself as I'm also Chicano, and also with the X. And I am learning about Latinx too as well. If they want, and I'm totally open to every terminology. I think in the end, as long as I could say you're my brother and we're sisters, I think that's where the importance comes from.
That's great. You all brought up very great points. And I want to highlight the portion of education and also togetherness, because, in a world where we are easily divided and there's been lots of divisiveness, terms and phrases like these that have sparked debates and controversies to where, some folks feel like they have to choose a side. And if you choose this side, somehow you're less than the other. But in reality, when we're operating within the realm of this world, I think for the most part, we're all treated the same, no matter what we're called, right? So I think that idea of can we educate and talk about and support each other as brother and sister are very important. You brought up some great points about the Pachucos, right? That whole movement. And if we go back and look at what preceded the Chicano movement of the 60s, We go back and talk about the Zoot Suit riots and people identifying Pachucos as Mexicans who somehow stood out. I don't know if it's the flashy clothes, the way they talked, or the way that they were identifying and finding themselves within the realm of what is actually their homeland, and in a place where they have, it's almost like living on a border, even without a border, right? But they're finding ways to self-identify, right, in this place that's constantly labeling them, right? And so we have that whole discrimination movement there, and then the children of them being able to push forward further with the civil rights movements of the 1960s. You also brought up the idea of students not being able to identify, right? I was talking with a couple of people today, and I was mentioning that one of my mentors, who's passed away, rest in peace, was Sal Castro, and he was an educator in East Los Angeles, and I had the great privilege of being able to, learn under his tutelage about various topics, whether it was the blowouts, right? The movie Walkout came after, of the 1960s, or the East LA 13. And those were always very important to me, as people reclaiming and identifying who they are based upon their own right to self-determination, not what someone is putting across. So those were very important to me, and I wanted to highlight that. If for the audience listening, if you have not seen the movie Walkout or read about the East LA 13, it's definitely something that you want to take a look at. When you have people being discriminated against, and I'm going to say in their own land for the language that they speak, right, where they're being paddled and punished for speaking a language because it's not English, when their culture is not identified, when they're not learning about themselves in school, when they don't have teachers that look like them, it is demoralizing. It is an erasure of self and culture, and as far as I'm concerned, it's criminal. So legislation had been passed, things have changed, and you've all expressed some form of a struggle to not only self-identify, but to claim that. And so I would ask, I would go back to Socorro to ask you about the experiences that you had coming up through the social movement, with the farm workers, community boycotts, et cetera, just to talk a little bit about the struggle and the triumphs that you've gone through to get to where you are now.
Right. So let me start by sharing. You mentioned that at 12 years old, I was the youngest delegate of UNO. So when I was going through elementary, LA Unified had an integration program, and they were busing students to other areas. I was in East LA, in East Los Angeles, and I was being bussed to Tujunga, Pinewood Elementary School. First of all, it snowed. We didn't have snow in East LA. They had programs, they had dance programs, their schools were so clean, and I was just in awe. So when the church, right, because UNO was always like just reaching out to the churches to get people, had announced that here was this organization, United Neighborhood Organization. In my 12-year-old mind, I thought, well, if I get involved and if I mention it, like our communities will become united, and then we could have this at Evergreen Elementary School. So that's what brought me to UNO. I bugged my mom, and we got on a bus and we headed down to like the convention center, and it was full of people, and I voted. But at that age, I was able to see the disparity in the schools. I went on to Belvedere Junior High School, where we had the biggest funding for the agricultural department. And to me, that wasn't okay. I seen like, wow, we don't need farm workers. We need math. And I was really into science, and I wanted more. We always got like hand down books from like other schools and stuff. So that kind of got me more involved and really speaking out. But at the core, I knew, like, I never thought that I couldn't make a difference. I just felt like if I spoke to the right people, or I got enough people behind this thought of mine, like it would happen. And so that was kind of like the motivator, you know, right? I think, and I'm like, wow, sometimes I think back and I'm like, it was just kind of idyllic, but it worked for me. It worked for me. And later on, I got involved in high school Mecha and East Los Angeles, ELAC Mecha. And we started working with the second great boycott with Cesar Chavez and the United Farm Workers. And that's, I was a young mother at 18. And I just couldn't fathom the idea of children being born without limbs because of this pesticides that were being sprayed on the crops and people having to work in those conditions. So I became very active. And I started going out there, and I was standing with my toddler at the time in front of the supermarkets and just really educating people about the boycott and the pesticides and really what was going on with the farm workers.
Sure. No, and thank you for that. I mean, because I mean, at such a young age, you know, no matter how you got into it, you stuck with it and it became a part of who you were, to be able to stand up for the rights of others and be a voice for those that may not be able to have a voice because they don't know how to articulate their needs, or because they may feel or they have been forcibly left out of those conversations. Again, you use the term education, and I want to go back to both Socorro and Luciano said they identify as Chicana and Chicano respectively, with the X from the Nahuatl language. And with the term Latinx, the way I've understood it is that it was a sort of a pushback against the patriarchal ideology of the Spanish language in terms of gender identity, whether it ends in an O for masculine or an A for feminine, but the X would be somehow encompassing. Now, I don't know if the X was put in because of the Nahuatl language, and so I'm here to be educated as well. And I'm calling on Greta to maybe speak to that position of the Latinx term.
It's highly contentious within the Chicanx community and the Latinx because it comes from more of a liberalism point of view of the X rather than the indigenous. Chicanx comes from the indigenous. Latinx, and it doesn't recognize, again, geographically, everybody to be included in that. And the difference with Chicano is it's a conscientious identity. It's not geographical. So that is inclusive to everyone. And I identify as Chicanx as well, also for my child who's gender fluid, twin-spirited child who's regaining his roots within his own gender and how he identifies as gay. And he's not comfortable saying bi, he's comfortable saying two-spirited. And that, again, was acknowledged within our culture. We were accepting of it. We actually elevated that because we believed that they were carrying both genders within them, and that was actually a gift to them. And so it became demonized through the Christian religion, through Catholicism within the Spaniards. They were the ones to come in and tell, and actually brought in the whole patriarchal power structure because women were elevated within our culture. We were appreciated. And so even within that, there's a battle within that. So that's another topic, but between Chicano X and Latinx, it is different. Latinx is believed to be more of a liberal, and a lot of Chicanx don't like that term simply because of the root of it, that it's more liberal, white generated colonizing way. So there's a big kind of debate about that.
Sure. You know, one thing I know, and you brought it up as a separate topic when you began to talk about two-spirited people and other indigenous identifiers. I don't think it's a separate topic at all, because of when we look at the influx of Spaniards into the Americas, into Mexica, into our indigenous areas, that did change a lot. I can speak to, you know, just the fact of how, and I don't know about you guys, and you can nod or agree or disagree when I say this, but I know of many individuals who identify as, I don't know if it's they identify whatever, however they identify. I say Southwest Indians. How about that? And that for me, that's inclusive of Southwest United States, Central America, and South America. So, but I know many individuals who, if I say to them that they are indigenous or that they are an Indian, it becomes highly offensive. They get highly offended. No soy, pinche indio, right? Don't call me that. And I see a few of you nodding. And I took some time years ago to research that. I'm not a native of Southern California. I'm from Michigan originally. But when I came here, just like, there's disparities and discrimination, but I saw marked discrimination here against people who were non-European. And I'm talking specifically, I'm going to say Southwest indigenous populations, because they didn't speak English or whatnot. And I had this conversation on an episode a few weeks back. I was just appalled that someone would consider someone ignorant because they didn't speak English, or that they would treat them a certain way because they didn't speak English, whatever it may be. I was equally shocked because I identify as not only African American, but I highly and fervently claim my Native American roots, because it's what grounds me here. It's where I've been, where my family has been for thousands and thousands of years, right? So when I heard folks, to me, who clearly from a phenotype looked indigenous, claimed that they weren't and they were offended, I was amazed. But then I began to dig into the history and found out how the Spaniards, when they came, there were 25 million indigenous people in Mexico when the Spaniards arrived. So there's no way that the 12 or 13,000 Spaniards who arrived somehow flushed out all that culture, and it doesn't exist. I think, in fact, and I may be wrong, that the majority of people in Central South America speak an indigenous language. I could be wrong, but I think that's true. My point was that it was because of all the torturing that the Spaniards would do. And I'm going to give a shout out to a former professor, Robert Perez, who allowed me to go on this journey with him to explore indigenous stories and populations, and expose me to a lot of the history through Southwest Indian indigenous territories. But it was done by the Spanish, so much torturing, because they wanted natives to speak Spanish, because they thought you're plotting against us, right? They wanted you to not be who you were, wanted to erase those identities. So they would torture you. And we know because they wrote about it. And as my Professor Perez used to say, they had no qualms about writing because there was no laws against it. They weren't in trouble. So if they wrote out, we went out and killed 12 squaw and castrated, this many bucks, these terms, no big deal. And so you can read what they did. I mean, putting people's thumbs in vices and pinching them down, to the point where mothers and fathers would tell their children, if you go out today, if the soldiers ask you, don't say you're an Indian, right? Be anything, be an esclavo, right? Because in this structure in Mexico, there's, 32 some odd racial categories, unlike what we have here, where at the very top are the peninsulares, those Spaniards born in Spain, and at the very bottom were Indians, and just above that were esclavos and negros, etc. It was better to say you were a slave, an esclavo, than to say an Indian, right? It was better to be anything. And so I'm thinking, over generations, as people begin to talk, all you knew is, I'm not an Indian. No, right? That's a bad thing. So what do you tell your children when they go out? Don't say you're not an Indian. And pretty soon it becomes a habit just to say that, to where generations today, many don't know even why it's a bad thing to say. But I'm willing to bet the farm. I don't have a farm, but if I did, I'm willing to bet the farm that is why that whole ideology of disclaiming self comes from. And so when we look at the terms that we're talking about today and the way that they've divided us, right? We've always been here, and I'm always appreciative of individuals that are trying to solidify and bring us back together, no matter what. As you said, Luciano, as long as I can call you my sister or brother, right? We're all in this mix of trying to reclaim who we are based upon the colonization and the practices of European countries in this continent and others. But this idea of bringing us back together. I need to take a quick break just for our sponsors. This is Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. We'll be right back.
Where do you watch TV?
OnWatch TV.
Nowhere.
OnWatch TV.
What's OnWatch TV?
OnWatch TV is one of the most exciting channels on Roku and Amazon Fire TV, with lots of categories to choose from movies to music, documentaries, and more. There's something for everyone.
What if people want to place their content on Watch TV?
You can visit the website onwatchtv.net to find out more, or email onwatchtv@gmail.com. Don't forget, check out OnWatch TV. See you on Watch TV.
See you on Watch TV.
OnWatch TV is available now on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Check it out. OnWatch TV. Luciano, I would come to you and ask, in terms of this idea of inclusiveness and bringing us together, how can we help younger generations to get to that point?
You brought up something about not identify, don't call yourself as Indio. Maybe what we look at is class, within class, of how people are looked at. And I think you brought in what class status in your family and what history, where are you at? And they look at you, because that was an important thing amongst everybody, at least also in my culture, my experience is that, where are you in class? And class, what I mean is in status. And are you, like, let's put into economic ways. Are you poor? Are you middle class? Are you rich? Or do you practice certain cultural, identities, things that maybe are taboo amongst the mainstream? And I think that's where you touched upon of why this class, kind of even amongst ourselves, have brought in a little bit of harshness and looked upon and frowned upon. And then the question was, this leads to what I wanted to say, was that how can we bring together, is that we never used to identify ourselves so openly and celebrate it as openly with everybody as we can. In other words, we were taught, at least my experience is that if you are Chicano, if you have your cultural, you're not going to celebrate as openly and as acceptable and at let's say an open setting of your peers, because your peers may be different and you may cause a stir. And that's what's my experience, is that sometimes we cause stirs amongst each other because there was the mainstream who said, no, I'm more important than you are. And you are not going to be one who is celebrating more of your cultural identity than mine. And I believe at that time it was a fear amongst each other, not so much an embracing of each other. And so we celebrated and we found each other as a group at my school who looked and maybe talked and acted like each other. And we stuck to that family unit. And then we celebrated smallly. And it was something that's why all these movements and everything is coming out, is because we want to pronounce and we want to have these conversations as we're doing now. And the way that we are going about this is through education podcasts. I think is the most beneficial thing that we could do, is we could instill through education and through starting even at the lower grades, because it starts, I remember being in preschool, kindergarten, you're going to look around, you're going to see who looks like me, who has the same eyes, who has the same hair. Oh, that person's different than me. They notice. But then if you can't have a conversation to say, why are they different and how are they different? And then put it in a positive, not in a negative, because all the stereotyping that we've done and still continue to do hurts. It doesn't, benefit anyone to have stereotypes around. In fact, we keep trying to break them down, and we still keep trying to talk. And I think that's the healthiest thing that we could do, is talk about it, identify it, and then move on and celebrate as we are. But it does take a lot of work, and it does take a lot of patience on everybody's side.
For sure. And I know that you are a second grade teacher, and so you can see firsthand how kids start to identify who is who among them. I know as a youngster, I kind of knew who I was and what I was. And I don't know if it was more so because I knew or because society was forcing that upon me in terms of the desegregation. But you bring up great points. I see Gretel may have some thoughts that she wants to express. So I'm not even going to ask a question. I would just ask her to chime in, if you would.
I've been taught since day one to be proud to be Chicana and say it out loud and celebrate it. So the idea that I'm taught to not say it or be, and I am, there is that kind of, you get pushback from other people about using Chicanx or Chicano because they think you're challenging their identity, and it has nothing to do with their identity. It has everything to do with what I call myself. And so there's that instant, well, if you're calling yourself a Chicana, what are you saying about me? And I haven't even said anything, right? And so I'm always proud of it. And there's white supremacy doctrinization that Mexico adopted. They started tracking who was indigenous, and they were telling people to marry white to kind of breed out the indigenous parts of our family. My mom to this day told me to marry white so that my children wouldn't have my features. So that's the kind of crap that our family and in Mexico has. People that look like me and Socorro, you're not gonna see them on television. You're not gonna see, we're gonna be the maids in that freaking novela. And that's by design, completely. So that comes from white supremacy from Mexico that the Spaniards brought to indigenous cultures. Tonantzin is believed to be where they prayed, where they say they saw the Virgin Mary. They lied. They never saw the Virgin Mary there. They only told the priest that so that they can keep going to that hill and pray for Tonantzin. That's why the indigenous part of us celebrates Tonantzin and not the Virgin Mary, or do both. So there's a lot of, we've survived with our indigenous culture by hiding it within Catholicism, because it was within our life. If we didn't, say, yes, we're gonna do what you wanna do. They killed our children, they killed the men, they kept the women because they needed to breed them out. So that's a lot of craziness that happened, and that's by design. So it's not like we don't know what's going on, but to address that would mean we have to address the white side of us, because I am white, but I can't claim it. I'll never be able to claim white, right? But I'm part white and part indigenous because that's how we evolved. So when I bring that up, that means the people within my culture has to accept that they've used white supremacy tools. And even to this day, I'll be in a union, I'll be at a teacher's meeting, and I have people still indoctrinating and colonizing us with those practices. That's where the debate comes in, because we're trying to figure out who's still colonizing and who's still adopting those things. And then you have a Chicano movement that's saying we no longer want to be colonized. We're liberating ourselves from that. And I think that's the hard part, because if you have to look at yourself and think, what part of me is colonized? How I need to change that. That's a huge internal shift you need to make. So I can see how Chicanos trigger that. And I've seen it triggered when I bring it up. So it's emotional because I've gotten a lot of pushback. It took me 9 years within CTA to bring up nicely, calmly, not, I don't want to be categorized as the angry Chicana. And then it got to a point after 9 years of them not listening to me about Hispanic not being the best term to call the caucus. I finally got fed up. That's when I got righteously angry that they weren't being inclusive enough. Then I got categorized as the angry Chicana, but it took 9 years. No one's going to talk about the 9-year conversation that took place for me to finally just get pissed off about it. Sorry.
No, there's no need to be sorry at all, because these are real lived experiences, and this is the reason why I wanted to bring people on who were informed, who had a position, who had a passion and concern about it, because it is real, and we're looking at 500 years of getting to this point, and so whatever emotions and it doesn't even begin to put a dent in the 500 years that people at different levels, whether it's social class, racial categories, skin tones, or whatever, have had to experience in that time. And there's some truth to that. I understand, and I can look back throughout the history that's there, and to see where Spaniards initially they destroyed the codex, get rid of the histories of the people, you can control the people. They went and destroyed the temples and put churches where those were, because the people, those were sacred places. And so people will continue to go to those places. And over time, as you said, we get rid of the men, we get rid of leaders. You know, if you give me a bunch of children, I can raise them to be whatever I want. I can indoctrinate them to think whatever I want them to think. I mean, you can see that with Hitler and the Nazi youth, right? And that's everywhere. So it is important, and it becomes, you know, the struggle that you're talking about. Not only is it a social struggle, but when it comes to social wrongs and injustices, you know, as much as we say, and I like to believe we are a nation of laws, right? There enters the political realm of how do we rectify those wrongs. And we've seen legislation pass, we've seen people advocate for change, and change has been slow to come, and some change is happening. And I'm thinking of how do we continue to utilize the political process to ameliorate some of the social injustices that have occurred. And so, Socorro, as you are right now representing it and in a position, and you're running for a state assembly to represent various populations in your community and whatnot, you know, how can we continue on a path of educating others around us and utilizing the political process to make some of the changes that Gretel has eloquently exemplified in need of change? I'm sorry, you're muted.
Okay, I was saying you vote, we vote. That's how we make those changes. And we vote in people that can identify, that aren't, you know, hiding that they're Chicanas, that, because along with that comes an appreciation, at least for me, of other cultures, right, and other people. And just, you know, as we're talking about our issues, I could see that parallel with our Black and brown communities, right, that marry white and, you know, keep the family light. And again, that's white supremacy. And it's happening still in Mexico. And it's just, it's a shame, but we need to change that. You know, it's okay to be brown. It's okay because it's beautiful. And that's where the term Chicano and Chicana, we've been taught to hide for so many years. We're now embracing our indigenous side, and we're running with that. We're running with that. And again, it's that appreciation. But I think that's where the conversation starts. As far as making changes, I'm running in a district, AD 33, which is very red. I remember in South Central, I was learning about Martin Luther King and Cesar Chavez. My grandkids aren't learning that where I live, and we need to change that, because it's human nature to be afraid of what you don't know. And it's horrible to say, but you know, we have a Cinco de Mayo celebration that attracts protesters in the area where I'm running. So we need to change that, because there needs to be an acceptance of all the communities, because our communities are diverse, and that it's beautiful and there's beauty in that. But we need to recognize each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. And you hit the nail on the head for me when you said it's human tendency to fear what you don't know. And that's why education is so important, as Luciano and all of you have pointed out, to be able to educate. And I've never seen where throughout my lifetime where the solution to problems was to not talk about them. And so folks that are pushing for us to not talk about individuals or to not talk about history, I don't think they understand the danger in that. I think maybe a lot of people are living in the immediate and they're somehow feeling affected. Maybe it's guilt. As I saw one post, you know, I think it was, I don't know if it was Ruby, what's her name? The young Black girl, civil rights era. She was going to school and slapping myself on the head for not remembering the name. But the idea was that individuals that were trying to prohibit and discriminate against her are now some of the same individuals that don't want us to teach the history of what they did. So as grandparents, they did these things, but I don't want you to teach my grandchildren about that. And I'm not talking about an individual. This is not a race thing for me, right? This is more of a human thing for me, because I don't want anyone that's listening, and thank you to all those listeners. Let me just say again, this is Let's Chew the Gum, the podcast where we talk about everything from A to Z, and I mean everything from A to Z while we chew the gum. My guests aren't chewing gum today, I don't think, but I have some back here. You couldn't tell, but the idea is, if those things were so terrible, let's talk about them, right? The whole idea we were raised was, we learn history to not repeat it, right? We're telling people to not teach. We're telling people we don't want you to learn. Well, in that void, there's bound to be a lot of opportunity to repeat terrible things. So I would invite people to not fear learning, but to learn and be able to make a decision, an informed decision. I have no problem with anyone with an opinion about any topic. I just want, please be informed, right? Have some things some evidence to back it up, some type of background support, so that it, first of all, can take you seriously. Because if you're just operating off of emotion and reactions, that's fine too. But as Luciano said, let's educate, let's become educated so that we can understand, because there's a lot of people in history that have been wronged of all races and categories, but we're dealing with all of those situations, and it's not right to eliminate the experiences of others because somehow you fear that it threatens your position. I don't know. Maybe if I was in a different position, I get that, but I don't think so. Luciano, you have to solve this problem that we're discussing, and you have to solve it tomorrow. So I'm going to put you on the spot and say, Socorro said we vote. Gretel is saying we need to talk and communicate and get these things out, and people need to listen. And I'm going to come to you, and not in a patriarchal way either. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. But I'm going to come to you because you're next on the panel. To solve this issue, what do we do?
Wow. You know what? When I was going high school, I got involved a lot, just like what Socorro says, just being involved. And one thing is I got involved in the political aspect of it. I got to be a 17-year-old campaign organizer for the District 14, which is in El Sereno, Lincoln Heights, all those Eagle Rock areas. And one thing that helped me actually shape my life was that I organized my people, which is other 17-year-olds, other 16-year-olds, other young, up and coming, very excited. And, all of us were just, even if we didn't know, we listened. And that's the thing, what you talked about. Come back with some knowledge, but listen. If I don't know something, I want to listen and then do my own research. So in that aspect, what we did is our own youth, we organized ourselves to go walk the communities. And our goal was to have our one official become elected. But through that goal of having someone elected, we knocked on doors. We met the people who actually lived, across the street, down the street, across the other neighborhood, across the other side of the tracks. And by knocking on the doors and them discovering and talking to one another, what are you doing, and explaining, and then learning to say, wow, these people work at different types of work, types of jobs. They make different incomes. They come from different classes, social classes, religion, and we started to notice that there wasn't just one solve it all kind of solution here. There's a multiplex of what we call as life that we were so young that we didn't know, but what we really did know is that we know people. We knew people by saying we smiled, we treated with respect everybody. And it came down to, can we sit down and have a cup of coffee or soda or something together to share what we're doing right now? It's just sharing my experience, my truth. What is your truth? I'm going to share my truth, and that's my experience. That's my struggles. And we did. And for that small summertime that I've done that for that campaign season, I felt like we improved the communities. We improved because now we knew what was missing, the pieces of making their lives different. Area 4, area whatever could be parks. There was not enough parks. this other area. There wasn't, stores. There wasn't corner stores. There wasn't this. There was a need of more books, more libraries. But see, all those became pieces of the puzzle that we all try to jigsaw them together to say, this is a map of who we are as a person or humanity or society, that we're all living together that we didn't know. Yeah. And I think that we did not close down ourselves. We did not put our blinders on to say, I live in this bubble, in this house, and that's all I know. We expanded that. We took a chance to expose and be, I would say, naked of our emotions, naked of our wisdom at that time, of our youth. And I believe that the youth knows a lot more than what we give them credit. I knew, I could say right now, as being a teacher, these kids have a lot more energy and a lot more to give, as long as we could be some kind of guidance there to guide them in that positive light and keep guiding them and supporting them, and not doubting, nor disparaging, nor criticizing. Who wants to hear you're never going to be able to do that? You're not going to be able to do that. Who wants to hear, no, you're the wrong color. No, you had the wrong name. Even the name was important. I struggled with Luciano because they made fun of my name. They thought, Luciano, it's like, what's that? You're not a Dave, you're not a Bob, you're not a one syllable name. And that I had to embrace myself to discover too, as well, and bring proud. But see, that again, I go back to my young ones who I teach in second grade, and I celebrate who they are, what they want to be, their names, everything about them. And I think if it starts that we could bring that healthy relationship to our young youth now, and as small as they come on in, and celebrate it all the way to the end, I think I know we will have some very positive, productive people everywhere. And I think that's going to be one of the answers.
Oh, that was great. That was great. We should be able to replicate that for sure. My other two guests, you guys are not off the hook. You're going to solve this too. I'm going to come to you next, Gretel.
Thank you.
And that gives Socorro a little bit of a cheat sheet, because now she knows I'm coming to her, so she has some time to prepare. But Gretel, same question for you. How do we solve this issue?
I gotta say, Socorro and I have like minds, so I'm pretty sure we're gonna bounce off each other. She'll probably come out with something brilliant after me, so more power to her. Ethnic studies, push for it from K through all the way to high school. We need to push ethnic studies, because that is representation and the truth telling of our history, and that needs to be in our schools, and we need to fight. And even though Gavin Newsom just signed it, it's not for another 8 years. So right now in my district, I'm making sure to fight for it now. There's certain districts that have already made it a requirement. And so there's kids that are being liberated every day, and teachers now, we're not teaching this curriculum like drug dealers. In the past, we used to be like, hey, here you go, here's a lesson plan that liberates our kids, right? My kid didn't build a mission. He did a power presentation on the side of the indigenous people, and he talked about how they were killed. And here's this little third grader talking about the murder of indigenous people. He said, Mom, it was so quiet. It was like you could hear a pin drop when I was done, because they didn't know what to say. They were so used to building these missions and taking pictures next to them that they didn't know they were basically building. It's like asking Jewish children to build a gas chamber, and they didn't realize what. And so my kid brought a little third grader, changed that in that classroom. So I think with ethnic studies, we can absolutely do it. When we did Chicano Youth Leadership Camp for 13 years, that means a group of us teachers got together with college students, and we generated a camp for a week that was modeled by Sal Castro. And I teach walk out every year to my babies, so that they're reminded of the history of their language, especially my ELD. When they see that and they're like, they hit them, Mr. Rodriguez? I said, yeah, sweetie. They ask your parents, they'll probably tell you that they were hit. My kids would come back like, I'm gonna speak Spanish and I'm gonna speak English. It was a very empowering film. So always decolonize your curriculum and share it with PLC groups. And now that ethnic studies is being embraced, I think even push it even further. For me, that's the answer, because when I saw in the Chicano youth group, you saw kids that was the cholo to the ASB president to the kid who was the C in the classroom. You had them all in a group, and they all talked about how they identified themselves. At the end of that camp, they would all call themselves Chicanos, and we didn't have anything to do with that. We wouldn't push it. They would come to their own identity and say, I'm a Chicano, damn it. And I would be so proud of them because they came out it on their own. And people will say that we indoctrinated, that we pushed them. Our babies are smart, just like Luciano said. They're smart. They're part of the reason why we have ethnic studies today, because they organize with their parents along with teachers. I like to thank Are from LA, from San Diego to Sacramento. They were a part of that movement. So voting is important, like Socorro said. And I'm proud that she is not embarrassed to say it and that she's running her campaign with it. Because I've known some people that are not proud to say it out loud or think that they're going to compromise their campaign if they identify that way. So I honestly feel ethnic studies is the way to liberate everybody.
Awareness and education. Yes. Yes.
Right.
Okay. Socorro, same question.
Thank you.
Solve this
Thank
issue.
you. Right. I wish it was that easy, and I wish I could, like I had a magical wand. But first of all, thank you. You know, Gretel and Luciano, you guys are on the front line of this. You're on the front line of this issue because you're doing an awesome job in teaching ethnic studies at second grade. My gosh, that's awesome. But we need to make what you guys are doing the norm and everywhere, right? And that's why I'm running for office, because there are communities still that are not, that it's even difficult to have staff that looks like the community that they're serving. And, you know, in my area, that's what's going on. And I think that's part of the issue, that they don't know what's, you know, they don't know their children. So, you know, it would have to really, they'd have to go far and beyond to teach ethnic studies at the grade levels. But I think, like I said, you guys are on the front line, and we need it everywhere. We need it everywhere, because education is the way to go. That's what we need to do. We need to educate our kids, because a lot of this isn't coming from home. A lot of it is, like, I taught my kids, but not all kids are taught that it's okay to be different, right? That some words are not okay to use. And we need to teach that in schools.
Absolutely. Education, education, education. I go so far as to say that anyone who is going to be, I teach in a teacher training program, so I'm constantly pushing even ethnic studies in those courses that I'm teaching for teachers, right? And I think that needs to be a requirement, because the one thing that I impress upon these the teacher candidates that I have the pleasure of working with is, you know, when you go into a classroom, you don't get to teach the students that you want to teach. You don't get to go and teach the ones, you have to teach who's coming through the door, right? And public schools are funded by public funds. And so that means it's inclusive, and it needs to be inclusive of all of the people that go there. So I think if we can empower and educate the teachers who are, the pre-service teachers, those that are, going through their courses for the credential, I think it starts there too. And I'd like to see those replicated. Going back to the terminology that started off our conversation tonight, the terms of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Chicano, Chicana, etc. I sometimes wonder, and I think about, you know, someone says to me, I forget the phrase, but they were talking about how do you distinguish between someone who is from Mexico, Guatemala, Puerto Rico, et cetera. And sometimes I sum it up as similar to ways that we distinguish African Americans, right? I say some things like, you know, it just depends on where the ship stopped, right? Where did the ship stop? Because, you know, perhaps people before identified as Aztec or Maya or Mayo Indians or Yaqui or let's pick a name. I don't know, Kiowa. We could say Navajo. We could say Apache. People identified based upon who they were. And I think a lot of the struggle that we have today with the terms that we have been discussing is that people have become awake over the years, right? People are searching for and asking the question and wanting to know, who am I? Right? And we're searching it. And so maybe there's someone that you love, a caretaker that says, hey, we are this, and we embrace that. You're in a community that says, we are this. And there could be another community just like you that's saying a different term, right? Because we're searching and we want to belong. And for so many years, due to colonization and the breakup of families and the murder, the rapes, etc., we have been displaced. And so people are hurting. But as people are finding their way back, they get the sense of community, the sense of feeling good. And I think that's the sense of all the fervor that we see when people hold on to terms so tightly to say, no, I'm this. And like Luciano said earlier, I'm totally open to everyone self-identifying as long as I can call you my brother and my sister, because I understand the struggle, right? I understand why we have these situations, right? We don't get to, for many of us, we don't get to connect with our indigenous roots of who we really are. So we're searching, we're in search of family. You guys, I consider you all my family. My listeners, you're more than welcome to be a part of this family, right? It's all about solidarity. It's all about truth telling. It's all about individuals claiming their right to exist in the way that they need to exist. And it's about respecting that. It is about teaching their history. It is about not closing down studies because of some phrase, because of a lie you heard about CRT. It's about saying, hey, this is the history that we experienced. This is who we are. This is where we are. Now let's deal with it. Let's not sweep it under the rug. That doesn't work. That's never worked. I tried it as a kid, clean up the house and sweep under the rug. That doesn't work. Dirt's gonna be dirt, and it's gonna be there, and it's gonna surface. So let's do better and for ourselves and each other. I want to give, and you guys all gave an excellent response to my tough question of solve this problem. I want to give one last opportunity for each of you. Again, you've already done it, but I just want more. I don't want it to end. So a small call to action. If you could talk to my listeners, and there's listeners, like I said, in 40 countries around the world. If you could talk to them and just give one final thought as to, I'll let you just give your final thought. I won't define it. Your final thought, 1 minute or less. And we'll start with Greta.
Stop colonial shaming. Whether someone speaks Spanish or not, let them be who they are, because there's indigenous language that we don't acknowledge or speak. So don't shame somebody for speaking Spanish or not speaking Spanish. Also, stop colonizing yourself to the point where you align yourself with the white supremacy group or white liberalism, and then weaponize yourself against other people of color. And I've seen that, where people say, I'm good friends with white people, I'm gonna align myself with them, they're more powerful, and I'm gonna weaponize now my ethnicity against you. So they like to pit us against each other. They like to weaponize our culture against each other. And so stop being used as a pawn and liberate yourself, love your brother and sister, but do not align yourself with white supremacy by thinking that if you act white, speak white, which that is a horrible term, because the idea that if we're smart or we speak right, that it's only white can do that, and that's why we're considered white. It means that we, regardless of whether I speak well, educated, not educated, need to know that we're all victims of being colonized. And if you think by aligning yourself with the white group that makes you more powerful, know that that hurts me, that I can't call you my brother and sister when you align yourself with the very people that are going to hurt me. So that's my advice.
Thank you. Luciano.
I like to say that start off by, of course, love yourself and love your family, and then get to know your family. Ask them the questions of who they are. Maybe by searching your family roots, you'll discover who you are eventually. And if you don't, still look, read and educate yourself of where you might have started. It's always great. I look through my genealogy and I'm still discovering amazing things, as well as hurtful and as well as painful struggles that my family went through and secrets that you may not know. But that is all in history, just like any other history you may learn. And this is something that has to deal with your own personal growth. So I would say, if the love of discovering who you are, start with your family, get to know them and love them no matter what they tell you. Make sure, because the love's got to be there, guys. I know it's going to be hurtful, but the struggle is that if you could love yourself and love your family as much, that's going to give you a chance to love the world. And it's going to make you love actually of some of the injustices that are out there for you to somehow rational and even probably be better and rise above all the negativity out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Socorro.
I would say to your audience, tonight we've covered a few topics, and we covered the terms, right? And don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to ask, where do you see yourself, right? For those non-Latin, Hispanic, Chicano, Chicanas, don't be afraid, because we're all finding ourselves, and don't be afraid to just ask, how do you, are you a Hispanic? Are you Chicana, and why, right? Because again, we go back to education, right? Because maybe you'll learn something that, oh, wow, I didn't know that. We're all a diverse people on this earth, and through understanding of each other, we can learn to love each other.
I love it. I love it. Excuse me. I want to thank all of you for being fantastic guests today, because this is not an easy topic to discuss. It's not an easy topic to explore. And I'm sure that we'll get some feedback, and I'm very open to continuing this conversation, because as smart as we all are, because we're all smart, we can't encompass every viewpoint and aspect. But I think you guys did a great job, and I'm very happy that you were on the show today. I look forward to more. For my audience that's listening, I appreciate you as always. Remember, if you have questions for my guests or for me, you want to see a certain show topic, or again, be a guest on the show, email us at letschewthegum@gmail.com. And as you know, I'll reply back. So thank you so much again. And remember, we always have
Something for your mind. Something for your mind. Something for your mind.
무엇인가 정신을 집어넣으세요. 마음에 어떤 것 필요합니까?
Something for your
정신을 집어넣으세요.
mind. Something for your